Hey everyone, welcome to Flywheelpod, your number one source for everything Frax, DeFi, and everything in between. If you want to know what's going on in the world on chain, you've come to the right place. This is DeFi Dave, here with capital K. We're here to help you harness the power of the flywheel. And today we had a very special podcast, but this one was particularly special because we had two stablecoin OGs, people really pushing the space forward and on their respective paths. And it was definitely somewhat of a bromance between Sam Kazemian and Ameen, both founders of respective Frax and Rye. And I just really enjoyed the conversation, them going back and forth. Both characters that live on chain, see a lot of what's going on, and are really pushing these stablecoin experiments forward. Kit, what did you think?
Like my main takeaway was that Ameen and Sam are both clearly on very distinct paths, and they're very clear about it. We asked Ameen, what does success look like? And that was completely different than what we heard from Sam. However, both of them are still thinking of ways to be positive sum together along these two very different paths. I thought that was super cool to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they're both stablecoins, but they couldn't be more different as stablecoins, different goals and different ways of achieving that goals. And like because they're on different paths, there are actually a lot of synergies that we get into in the episode.
Yeah, especially with like the governance, the way Ride does governance is like so different from the way Frax does it. So I think there's a lot of things they can learn from each
Hmm.
other as Ride scales even bigger and as Frax tries to decentralize more. It's a good balance.
Yeah. And it's not like it's not like one should be more like the other. It's like it's good that they're different. And it's good we have these different experiments going on. And we'll get all into it in the episode. So don't forget to subscribe. We have over 650 subscribers on YouTube. Don't forget to hit that bell notification so you get that steady stream of content. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Flywheelpod, Telegram, our group at Flywheelpod. You can follow me on Twitter at DeFi Dave 22.
You can follow me at 0x_K.
And let's get the flywheel spinning. All right, this is Flywheelpod. We're getting these very special stablecoin episodes started. We have Ameen, the founder of Rye Reflexer. He also founded Spankchain and, of course, pioneered MakerDAO. He is a governance junkie, I must say. And we have Sam Kazemian back with us once again, the founder of Frax and also founder of Everpedia. So two vets in the crypto space. And, of course, we have my host, Capital K, here. And we're going to get this started. So, me and Capital K were talking about this, and there's been a lot of talk, as always, about stablecoins and specifically around governance and specifically around if like stablecoins were to scale in the future, like what do they look like? Like how, there's been a lot of debate about like centralized to decentralized, like can they actually scale? Like what trade-offs need to be made? So, and a lot of it revolves around the stablecoin trilemma. So to start this, I would like to ask, Sam, each of you, like, how do you define the stablecoin trilemma, and what do you guys think are the most important parts of trying to solve it in order to scale to trillions of dollars in circulation for your reflective stablecoins?
Someone else start. I don't remember the exact trilemma.
Yeah, so let me get going on it. Yeah, I think the trilemma kind of got a colloquial uh, thing that is it goes off of Vitalik's blockchain scaling trilemma. For anyone that's like not familiar with it, the trilemma originally started with like Vitalik by saying like, okay, to scale a blockchain itself, like the consensus and actually the throughput, like you basically have to give up either decentralization for like throughput or throughput for more decentralization, and it was originally meant for like blockchain scaling debates, but it's kind of interesting that it took a stablecoin scaling basically. And to explain it to people who aren't familiar, the idea is basically that in order to really scale a stablecoin, there's three things that are really important, right? The peg and how wobbly it is around a dollar or whatever unit. The actual collateral, whether the collateral is seizable or has any custodial risk. That's another point of the trilemma triangle. And basically the last point is how scalable and elastic the money supply is. Can you create this stablecoin basically on demand and easily as people demand more of this stablecoin unit? And the idea behind this scaling trilemma for stablecoins is that if you want it to be scalable, basically printing stablecoins on demand, you either have to essentially be like algorithmic and decentralized, which means they're really bad at the peg side of this triangle, right? Because it's a 3-point triangle, so you give up one side for the other two. If you want to be extremely good at the peg, right? Like always a dollar, never breaking your peg, and scalable, you're basically a fiat coin, right? You just hold a dollar in a custodial bank account, but then you give up the decentralization aspect of it because almost all of your collateral is custodial risk and blacklistable and etc. And the last point is like if you are like LUSD or something that's entirely decentralized collateral, so it's totally decentralized, non-custodial, and the other two sides of the triangle, you're going to have to give up one of them. Either your peg becomes wobbly, right? Like if your target is a dollar, you start wobbling a couple percent around a dollar, which basically makes it kind of not as useful for people that want to hold the dollar stablecoin, because you don't want to buy when it's like $1.02, and then when you want to sell the stablecoin, it's 98 cents. You'd rather just probably take the custodial risk of like USDC or something, unless you're doing something really off the grid. So the idea behind all of this stablecoin trilemma, which is like kind of a reference to Vitalik's original blockchain scaling trilemma, is that stablecoins seem to have this trilemma as well, but in terms of different situations, right? The peg, the collateral, and the elasticity or scalability of the money supply. Those are the three main points. And obviously I have my own opinions, really excited to talk with one of the biggest brains in the industry, Ameen, and see what his own views are about this as both of a fellow stablecoin project founder, but also just being in the game since the very, very early days. So hopefully that was a good background on the stablecoin trilemma.
Nice. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, well
And
put.
so, like, how do each of you like go about and like design when making the design choices for your stablecoin and having this stablecoin trilemma framework in mind? Like, what do you choose to prioritize and why?
Well, for Rye, it was an experiment in trying to make it as decentralized as possible. So we obviously made sacrifices in capital efficiency as well as stability, or the normal perception of stability, or sort of the benchmark everyone else has, which is the dollar. So Rye is a fork of MakerDAO's DAI, but it's different because it's not pegged to one USD. We started it at 3.14 USD, which is sort of an arbitrary value. And the neat thing about Rye is that it allows itself to have like positive and negative rates, but the rate is the rate of change of the peg. And so it plays with its own peg in order to stabilize its supply and demand. So if the price is up for a bit, then it'll set a negative rate so that it incentivizes people to sell it. The other thing about Rye is that it's only backed by ETH. So it's not quite as capital efficient as something that would make $1 with $1, of course. The advantage of Rye is that the collateral isn't isn't in somebody else's custody, so it's not as easily censorable. It's just ETH, and it can be more decentralized for that reason too. There's less moving parts. There's less governance attack surface area, so that try to make it more decentralized. The other stablecoins, in our view, are sort of peacetime stablecoins. Like decentralization is one of those things that doesn't matter until it does, and then it matters a lot really suddenly. And so if you only design and make the sacrifice away from decentralization, then you'll just one day be really surprised. And so the interesting conversation that's unfolding in the MakerDAO forums and Discord now is like, them being surprised about the USDC potential risk, of censorship as a collateral in their whole smart contract. Only $75,000 worth or so, maybe 100 grand of USDC in the Tornado smart contracts were frozen, but it was the first time that, some like the USDC in a contract had been sort of lump sum bulk frozen, irrespective of who's it belonged to, even like European people who weren't subject to the sanctions. So mostly what's happening now is us adjusting to this perceived risk and wondering if maybe we should have a little bit more decentralization. So.
Yeah, Sam. So like with the whole Tornado Cash situation, like what was kind of Frax's view on it, and like how would you respond with like concerns, because you guys have USDC and derivatives of USDC as collateral.
Yeah, so I actually agree a lot with what Ameen has been saying even before the Tornado Cash situation and afterwards. So to give some background, Frax right now is the fifth largest stablecoin and the second largest decentralized stablecoin after DAI. There's about 1.5 billion Frax in circulation. It's highly used. It's bridged to multiple L2s or L1s, and Frax does have USDC exposure risk, right? So that the two largest decentralized stablecoins, DAI and Frax, we have, to put it candidly, quite outsized USDC risk. Now, I don't think it really matters to say whether DAI has more or Frax has more, but I think actually DAI has about like 80% or 75% of its supply, last time I checked, is actually USDC. If you go to makerburn.com, which actually does a really good job of combining all of the PSMs and then adding them all up, you'll actually see, if you go to makerburn.com, you'll see 82% of all the 7 billion supply of DAI is from quote quote stable collateral, which is just the term for various PSM related. So like GUSD, it's a Gemini exchange fiat coin, right? USDC, which is Circle's issued stablecoin. I think they also use some Paxos, if I remember correctly, USDP or something like that. But in any case, you can see that the stablecoin trilemma kind of holds true here. Is like, if you want to be able to increase your money supply and have an extremely tight peg, so at least to the dollar, like Frax and like DAI does. I think Frax has one of the tightest pegs to USDC, USDT, and DAI. We're literally, I think, about 20 to 25% of Curve's total TVL, at least through our Frax PP and Frax 3CRB combined. We actually, as a protocol, subsidize, I think, about half or more of the size of the three pool itself. So all of the three pool trades going through Curve, part of the reason they're so efficient and extremely deep with very little slippage is like the Frax 3CRB pool essentially kind of subsidizes a lot of that, because basically like $500 million worth of those LP tokens are paired with Frax, and that obviously means underlying those $500 million of LP tokens, there's DAI, USDC, USDT mix that people trade against. So I think the issue is real, right? And I think one of the things I respect with Ameen so much is he's kind of become the prophet, so to speak, or like the kind of the anointed leader of like bringing to the community the kind of the cannery in the coal mine, so to speak, of, hey, we have to have this conversation, we have to have it now. And if it wasn't for someone like Ameen going to the Maker community and in the Maker forums, if it was just someone without a name or like without the reputation, I don't think it would be taken as seriously, right? Like, you need people that are extremely well known in the community and respected, like Ameen, kind of like Chris Bleck, and like those kinds of people that like people see them talking all the time, right? They know where they stand. And so it's a difficult problem. It's a very difficult problem. And obviously, my own view and the long game, so to speak, that Frax is playing, is that we have our answer to this is we call it actually kind of like the duopoly, which is like the dual stablecoin view, is that Frax is a dollar peg stablecoin. And then, as you guys probably know, and listeners here know, we have the FPI, or the Frax Price Index, which is the world's first on-chain stablecoin pegged to CPI, or essentially a basket of consumer goods, real-world items that people care about, like food, energy, medical care, etc., etc. And this peg is unique because no one else has pegged towards this. And the difference here is we have two stable coins. So essentially one free floating, right, to a basket of consumer items, whatever those happen to be in terms of price and weights of the basket, and then a hardcore dollar unit, right, which is basically for the current unit of account of the entire world. And our view is that as the FPI slowly grows, as it hopefully becomes a contender, or maybe the contender for the unit of account of the digital economy, kind of like Rye could become as well, Frax will continue to grow in the dollar stablecoin market, right? And this is going to probably seem to, in my opinion at least, be in the future, in the next 6 months or 12 months in crypto, going to end up becoming a really interesting idea, because you're already starting to see places like, Rune in the MakerDAO forum saying we should plan for DAI to depeg from the dollar, right? Which was a huge thing that like a lot of people were like talking about. We should, Rune was saying we should have DAI be free floating at some point in the future. Well, that's great, but the issue is like it would break a lot of things, like every single place that DAI is integrated, like these curve pools, every places, these vaults, these lending systems that people have debt denominated in DAI and things like that. So the way that we've basically done it here is that we've started with its second stablecoin and having it grow in parallel with a very unique worldview. The FPI is basically our answer to like the free floating question. It's basically our Rye experimentation, but basically without touching the Frax dollar peg stablecoin.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to ask, and first of all, you do look like a prophet right now. Coming down from the mountaintop, letting everybody know that like the time is now, to like really think about and care about decentralization and like actually take practical action towards it. So I want to like hear in your own words from like your observations of like how has Maker evolved and like over the past few years to like get to this point. Like there was that whole Twitter thread about like what happened with Maker, like how they went from like RWAs like a month, 2 months ago to now like Rune talking about DPEG. And how did you become the leader of the quote unquote decentralist party? And like what is your whole view on the whole Maker's conversation happening now in the forums?
There's two things I'd like to clear up. The first thing is, as the leader of the Decentralist Party, this is an interesting development. This is sort of a surprise to me because in their forum and Discord, I'm talking for no one but myself. As a Maker user holder, DAI holder, CDP user, etc., right? And the other thing is that I have been saying that they should be careful about the USDC for a while, but it was Rune who initiated this conversation this time around after he sort of came to the same conclusion that on a long enough timeline, it would behoove DAI to be able to also depeg from the dollar if they needed to, which started this whole conversation about how they might do it and what are the parameters and what are the risks that they're trying to do this in preparation for and so on. So yeah. Those things are fun, but yeah. So I think Frax has a really good model too of trying to run this experiment and be able to do it at the same time. FPI is very important as an experiment, just to be able to have a coin that represents a CPI and see how people feel about it, interact with it. It's a little bit harder to do something like a CPI debt token because it's probably going to go up more than the debt, or than the dollar debt. So you might prefer the dollar debt. And with things like Rye, even though we're trying to ungovern it and automate it as much as we can. Like, we also are doing it to understand where the limits of automation are. And even with RAI, even though we've automated the monetary policy, so to speak, by having the rate setting be automated by the any market price gap, we're still using the US dollar as a reference asset. And so it still somewhat depends on the fluctuations of the dollar and the esoteric movements of the dollar. And so for something like, the FPI, you need the governance part. And so I'm glad that Frax is exploring that and bringing that to DeFi for everybody else to use as well.
Nice. And Sam, I was going to ask, seeing how, Maker governance has evolved over the past few years, and you have these three different parties, you have like the central, like people that work at DAI and the VCs like work in the DAO. You have like the decentralist party and then the idealists. Like Frax is still very, compared to DAI and Maker, Frax is still very early in its governance, and it hasn't developed those parties yet. You kind of see like the beginnings of it, like maybe over issues like the collateral ratio, maybe over issues of decentralization. But how do you what like advice would you give to the Frax community as it grows, and like how, like where would you like to see parties? Would you like to like go more the ungovernance route? Like, have you thought about this at all? Like, what's your take?
Yeah, I think that basically the ungovernance stuff is brilliant and really smart, especially because I think RAI and LUSD kind of take that position. Difference is like I would personally try to kind of straddle a middle ground here, in the sense that you might think as an organization gets bigger, there are political parties or factions in all of them, but like, for example, we don't see that outwardly at like the Ethereum Foundation, for example, right? There's no like different implementations of like Geth and like the beacon chain, like Lighthouse, Deku, and all these things that are like politically charged. They're just different implementations from like a technical perspective. Now, you might say that there's no politics because the monetary policy of ETH is pretty static, right? Everyone agrees on like the history of the value change, the actual supply and all these things. But the way that I like to think about kind of the Frax economy and the ecosystem is if we can make it more like Ethereum Foundation development, right? Like where there's an overarching goal, and the goal is basically to create a new stable currency that is potentially the most useful in the global digital cryptocurrency economy. Then we are all working towards that specific goal, right? The same way with Ethereum, they're trying to build the kind of global settlement, kind of data availability layer for generalized computation, basically, right? And so Frax's goal is basically to build the best and hopefully the most useful new age stable currencies settled on digital ledgers, basically Ethereum L1 as the base layer. And so I think keeping that in mind. Now, with that said, Rune is brilliant. I've started talking to him recently and also reading all of his posts. He's a really brilliant visionary, in the sense that like, I don't think anyone really else in DeFi is coming up with these really long-term kind of, he calls them endgame roadmaps, or like the kind of visions to execute towards the take, 1, 2, 3 years and things like that. A lot of people are just more practical, what's the work that needs to get done, this week in the DAO or something like that. So I think a lot of people should be looking toward what Rune is saying, because I think, and obviously Ameen can correct this, but I think Ameen and Rune probably see very eye to eye on kind of the decentralization dangers, like for Maker, in terms of being motivated to make DAI more decentralized. I think they probably would be pretty aligned on some of the points on Rune's endgame roadmap.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about Maker governance is that, like, it's always sort of had these factions in place, like, because it started out as an ETH-backed stablecoin. Like, I liked it when, like, my first experience with DAI was like trying to find bank accounts and getting shut down for SpankChain in like 2018 and using it to escape the ETH crash in the bear market, right? So like DAI was a necessity for us, like I remember sending $20 of ETH for pizza money in like 2016 when there were no stablecoins, and the pizza money was 1 ETH. It's like like at that time DAI was the best thing that had ever happened. We had stability, and the original design from the original architect Nikolai was actually meant to not be pegged to $1. It was only after like Rune sort of decided to do the more pragmatic, more useful short-term thing, which was make it pegged to $1, that's how it was. But it actually had this target rate feedback mechanism that allowed DAI to set its own, like the rate of change of its peg from the beginning. And so these political factions have sort of like played out over the last couple of years. And it's been really fun to watch the Discord and the forum now, because it's like Nikolai has like 6 years of I told you so's to come back and throw into these forum discussions from before, when he was trying to get DAI to not be pegged to $1, and then from when he was trying to make it not all backed by USDC, and then he got himself and all of his friends fired. And like, in 2020 during the Black Thursday crash, that's when DAI, the price spiked up, it was above the peg, and that's when they introduced the peg stability module, and they decided to allow USDC collateral so that they could suppress the price and stabilize it. And like, that's really when, for me, I was like, okay, we need to make something else. Like, I want the original Maker back. I want my, ETH only stablecoin, the ETH maxi version of this that doesn't have too much governance and isn't deciding too many things. So that's what inspired us to make Rai. And now, 2 years later, I'm really glad we did, because we get to go back into these conversations, and we have a little bit of like research. We ran the experiment in prod, and so now we get to help be part of these discussions, where if we hadn't done this, I'd probably want to kill myself, because the discussions would be like, I don't know, what if we impose negative rates on people? But nobody's ever done that before. It's scary. Maybe we shouldn't do it. And instead it's like, well, look, Rai did it for 1.5 years in production, and like we roughly know how it's going to go, so we can evaluate it, and maybe maybe it's a viable path for us. I think that's like a really important role for Rai to be able to play, even though it is 100 something times smaller than Frax and market cap and so forth.
I think like, to kind of piggyback on that, I think that, closer to kind of FPI, right? Like, I think FPI's market cap is, I think, like 50 or 60 something million, and I think Rise is 20 something or whatever. It comes and goes because it's elastic, right? And so those are more comparable, right? They're in literally the same order of magnitude. They're as useful in this way. And I think, to be honest, when I first originally started, pitching the FPI stablecoin, I actually called it kind of the next generation of stablecoins, like this kind of Gen 3 of stablecoins, in the sense that the next kind of conversations, which seems to be everywhere around us, right? DAI floating again, or like, Rai having this really interesting peg, or the FPI being the first CPI peg stablecoin. It's about, can you create stable currency that's completely untethered from national currencies, particularly the US dollar, right, in terms of unit of account. And that might not be useful as useful at first, but you see it growing, and we see Rai growing in a different scale, obviously, because it's not dollar peg. We see FPI growing in a different scale because it's not dollar peg. But I think, just like with everything where it's time has yet to come, but you can kind of see it in the horizon. There's a 10, 50x growth coming if the time for it becomes right, and it seems like that's where we're headed in the coming months.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, like, between FPI and RAI, these are alternatives to the dollar denominated system. So, like, do you guys see like a post-dollar world at like some point in the future, or like maybe the dollar doesn't go away completely, but like you have other currencies like they're at the same level in a multipolar fashion? Do you see that happening? And if so, like, how do you see it happening?
So I might be getting this wrong. I think it was Chile. I read this in a blog post by JP Koenig, and they had this really interesting economic development where like after a year or maybe a couple of years of like 500% inflation, the people just started using the CPI as the unit of account for their long-term contracts. So you would have like your spot price for, bananas on the street would go for whatever the currency was in. But if you made a rent contract, you would actually denominate your rent contract in units of the CPI. And so it would be like your rent is like 100 CPIs, and then like that amount can change every month depending on like, how the CPI changes. Like at the end of a year, you might be paying 10% more in the currency units if the CPI went up 10% in the currency units, right? And so that keeps your rent sort of stable relative to everything else, which is a novel development. And it's really kind of a scam that we don't do everything that way already, because it forces everybody to speculate with their long-term contracts in terms of how like the currency will fluctuate. And that's really annoying to do. But it's kind of like the bankers kind of benefit from this, and like that from us all having to do the speculation because they get like more seigniorage out of it. But and so it would take a sufficiently large shock for people to be motivated enough to like coordinate around doing something like that. So I'm optimistic that if we build it and the guys who currently run it do everything poorly, at least we'll be able to protect ourselves and have better tools, because having the FPI is like one of the first steps for something like that. And you can even build automated systems that use like some sort of CPI unit as a reference itself. So a lot of the stuff we're doing is foundational, and a lot of this involves thinking about things that we take for granted differently. It's a pretty like weird thing to denominate a long-term contract not in your currency but in like the index price of the consumer goods, but like it's also a really weird thing when your currency inflates by 500% in a year. So like once one of those things happens, then it's less weird to start denominating in CPI units.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to like piggyback on that, I think, for example, this, like Ameen said, this wasn't possible or extremely difficult to do even if you wanted to denominate long-term contracts in something like CPI, because, for example, the closest thing to FPI maybe and TradFi financial assets is TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. Some people might say, oh well, you guys just created TIPS or something. It's actually not true, because FPI is basically a perpetual TIPS. So in traditional finance, you can buy these government treasuries that essentially pay out more if there's more inflation. But again, they all have an expiration date. They all trade on bond markets, and you have to roll them over. Like if your TIPS basically expire and mature, then you have to buy new TIPS. You can't really have, like Ameen was saying, a long-term contract like rent or something to like this specific TIPS contract that doesn't create a Schelling point for like a unit of account. What you need is essentially a token or some kind of unit that says, hey, this thing always is actually following the CPI, and To be honest, the closest thing to that is the dollar plus or minus the inflation rate is the the amount that's the peg is off essentially, right? And so as it means that the worse the people running it are getting, the more discussion about putting new people in charge of running it or something, or creating a completely brand new framework for how to run it using 21st century technology. So you do need something like the FPI or like RAI and stuff that there really is not a traditional financial analog for what it is. People like to find similarities to it and things like that, but they're just similarities. They're not exactly identical. And so these things are actually truly new financial primitives. So that's what's really exciting about it.
Right. So
Yeah,
no,
Kiet, how you feeling over there?
dude, I've just been silent, just kind of absorbing, from the prophet Ameen, and also from Sam K, right? Kind of the sharing, like from Ameen, I'm like, hey, from extreme circumstances comes like extreme solutions that needs to kind of meet that, right? 500% inflation, that means we need to price things against an index. And then from Sam House saying these are important experimentations and new people need to be put in charge and kind of govern this, leads me to think like, the size of RAI and the size of FPI today is still, quote, kind of like manageable, right? But once it really balloons 10x or even 100x, or even where we really see this thing going, how does the governance kind of upgrade and changes itself? Like, I'm curious to hear how Sam K would take governance from the FPI perspective, because ideally it should be separate from Frax.
Yeah, so there's a second token called the FPI share or the FPIS token that is a linked governance token. So it's actually not entirely separate from Frax shares. It's almost like a junior tranche of like a governance token. I don't want to say junior tranche of a debt, but it's basically it has the governance rights first of governing FPI, but it also has to stabilize the peg in terms of, so it gets the governance upside and value accrual, but also the downside. But some of the the cash flow and the underlying value also gets accumulated to FXS. So it's a really unique structural design for two governance tokens. And so Frax has kind of FXS, which is I like to actually just call it the layer one token of the Frax economy, right? Like the underlying, the original token. So if you hold Frax shares or FXS governance tokens, it's like holding ETH. You grow in value according to the sum total of kind of the economy on Ethereum, right? All of the people and the projects and transactions paying for gas, which slowly burns Ethereum and return value to ETH holders, right? FXS is similar to that. But for example, if you think Uniswap, for example, has a much faster growth trajectory or horizon in the next 12 months, rather than the summation of the economy on Ethereum, then you would hold more Uni tokens rather than ETH tokens, right? And so that's how we kind of designed the FPIS the governance token. The FPIS governance token is basically like the ERC20 token, so to speak, of an L1 blockchain, right? And it governs the FPI stablecoin. And they're linked in the sense that there's a mechanism where value accrues back to FXS. So it's a very unique thing. You could take a look at the docs, and I don't think there's ever really been a design like this, because I think people just release new tokens, right? They just release new projects and stuff, and we never want to do this, right? We never want to just continue to release tokens that are completely like uncorrelated or unrelated to each other. We're building kind of a Frax full stack economy, and the kind of, like I said, the view that we take is the L1 token is the FXS token. It's the original governance token of the economy, so they have to be linked the same way that a blockchain is linked economically to their underlying projects that make up its sum total of the economy. Now, if we're talking about specific how these things are governed, I think the biggest expert here in terms of actual governance stuff or ungovernance would be Ameen, because I personally think there always has to be some minimal form of human input to a minimum, at least, when trying to create stable units. But the trick and the art here is, how do you keep it at the absolute minimum, such as voting on oracles, or in the FPI case, voting on the indices of the items in the basket. If you ever remove the government CPI oracle, right? But that's a great question, right? And I think as the community of FPIS holders and FXS holders evolves, they will basically have to figure that out altogether.
Got it. How about you? I mean, how do you feel about Frax's kind of dual governance kind of structure?
I think it's a good model. I think we've thought about similar ways of expanding, to make more Rye-like systems. Thought of similar ways to expand, make more Rye-like systems, and also keep the tokens correlated. With something like Rye, you want to have a backstop token to take on bad debt should it come up. I think Frax does something similar. So there is like a good reason to have a new token for the new system, so that there's a risk share of some backstop. So I think I would be pretty scared if Rye was a lot bigger. I think we want it to grow, but it's good that these experiments have time to play out while the ecosystem is small. The worst case scenario is you end up like Terra, and you pump your experiment to $50 billion before you know how it works. That's a really bad case. I don't think anyone should do that. So yeah, their governance didn't exactly help. The governance was, like a couple people decided how they spend their money and when. So they didn't have any sort of algorithmic like peg enforcement that would have really helped them in a downturn. It also creates like really devastating information asymmetries. Like if you're in the room with them and you know that they're out of money, like you should turn around and short that thing to zero, the second you leave the room. And like that scenario is why you want these things to be algorithmic and automated on chain, so that like you can spend your reserves. And I think this is one of the things that Frax does really well with the AMOs, is that like, yeah, you might need to have governance over like how you spend your treasury, but like at least the on-chain operations for the large part should be automated. And then the governance actions are like authorizing new automated actions, right? And so for Rye, we think about that the same type of way, is that we want to automate the like core processes and then only have governance, really control the things that need it. The controller, for example, the parameters are still governed because we're experimenting with them. We aren't sure if the exact PI parameters are final, having only run it for 18 months. That there's small changes we might want to make. It'll probably be some time after running it in prod that we're like, we think that this is, like pretty sound. Now, the advantage of doing it the way we're doing it is we don't have to be like MakerDAO, where we like have a meeting every time we want to set a rate update, ever. They're like doing, a controller via hand crank, basically. And so we don't have to do that. Instead, we ungovern that stuff. And the stuff that has to stay governed so far is things like oracles, like Sam was saying as well. So like right now, Rye relies on the Chainlink oracle. It's a point of centralization. Yeah, we made some shortcut trade-offs, but like one day, maybe, I don't know, Chainlink decides to not service Rye anymore. Maybe Rye gets sanctioned. Who knows? But we should have a backup. And so, we want to point to some decentralized oracles, like a Uniswap TWAP for ETHUSD or Rye ETH. Well, what happens if liquidity migrates away from those liquidity pools over the next 3-5 years? Well, now you have to change that thing too. So now you have to, oracles are one of those things that you can't really ungovern over long term, but you also want to make sure that you really secure. because if somebody was able to hijack your oracles, they can not only crush your whole ecosystem, but anything that touches it. So governance raises the stakes a lot. Every governance system that protects the treasury has to be able to address the type of proposal that is, I would like to, it's like vote yes to give all the people who voted yes on this the share of the money in the treasury, So, yeah, I think we still have a lot to learn on the governance side, so we're approaching it cautiously.
Yeah, you mentioned, failed stablecoin experiments, and I think the thing about stablecoins is like when they fail pretty dramatically, and ever since, the whole start of the algo stablecoin boom from November, December 2020 until now, like you've had different stablecoins fail, mostly in similar ways, but just at bigger scales. Like you had ESD, you had Iron, and then you had Luna, and then you had Faye to an extent fail in a different way. And so what's your guys' take on why each of them failed? Sam, I know you have your thoughts about Faye, which you've been very public about, and how does each one of your stablecoins what do each one of your stablecoins learn from their failures, whether it's Luna or Faye or whoever else?
Well, I think my thoughts about Faye, for example, is more about the wind down, which is really crazy. I'm still hoping for a good outcome there because it just seems so crazy that they would wind it down that way. But that's more of a DAO governance thing than a specific stablecoin governance. But hopefully that goes well. But overall, I think each large stablecoin, I think people forget that Frax, it stands for fractional stablecoin, right? And essentially our whole premise when we started writing the original kind of white paper back in 2019, and then we released it in late 2020, was that algorithmic stablecoins, just a stablecoin that's backed by mainly another token that's its own governance token, or it's linked to its own cash flows in the future, does not work. That's why Frax came up with this thing where it's you need collateral at least some amount, and you need the collateral needs to be hard assets over collateralized loans or things that are totally not the same as its own governance token, whether they're some fiat coins, ETH or whatever. And so far that seems to be a correct assumption. This was our original assumption. I think after Terra, everyone now realizes it's basically a very obvious thing, if it wasn't already, which to us it was at all times. But yeah, and then I think what RAI and FPI are showing is that there is a viability for these new generation of stablecoins with different units of account. And I think as the landscape changes, more and more people will be talking about it. RAI has built a very, very good brand and kind of shelling point among kind of, decentralization. I don't want to say maximalist because it's kind of a pejorative, but more real cypherpunk oriented people. And it's really cool to see because even though it's kind of small in market cap like FPI, it has a very, very large outsized group of proponents. And that's how you build a really big following, right? Back when Bitcoin was $2, right? There were people that believed in it so much and continue to build around it that it is where it is today. And so if we can get a group of people in crypto that are really, really passionate ideologically about this new generation of stablecoins, non-nation state pegged assets, and how to actually run them, govern them, and how to make them useful, that's going to be one of the biggest sectors in crypto in the next 2 to 3 years. RAI, FPI, etc.
Yeah. So taking it back to the failed experiments and stuff. So for Faye, regarding their wind down, I kind of agree with you that it was a little bit unorthodox. Typically when you wind down, you pay out your debt holders and make them whole, and then whoever has the equity gets whatever's left. and that don't seem to have really followed that in this by leaving out the victims of the Fuse hack. It seemed like that was a debt that they agreed to take on, and that they should take it on. So Faye, and then Faye, I mean, they decided to wind down the whole thing. It's kind of hard to back a dollar stablecoin with ETH treasury. And then they also had a lot of like governance stuff around their, like they basically had to do treasury operations. And it's like a lot easier to do things like AMOs than treasury operations. So I think that's a better model. And the thing that I think, when everybody took out their pitchforks in response to the UST blow up, the algo stable, they all brought out their pitchforks for the algo stables. Like, Sam and I are out there like with our pitchforks out, like mad at people misusing the word algo stable. Like we're like trying to fight the battle for the algo stable word, but now it was futile. Like we lost, right? Like algo stable is a bad word.
Yeah,
we have to find another word.
Basically, the two worst words in crypto right now are cross-chain bridge and algorithm stablecoin. Those are the words.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
go ahead.
Yeah, it's like the algo part wasn't the bad part, right? Like the thing that I take offense to is like Rye has an algo, like it has a controller. The controller uses an algo. It sets the rate algorithmically, but it's not prone to the same type of catastrophic collapse risk that UST was, because it was collateralized, right? And like Frax is fractionally reserved, but like there's a difference between what Frax does to mint Frax and what Luna does to mint UST. Like, so when you minted UST, you literally took some Luna and you lit it on fire. You didn't like put it in the reserve. You just burned it. There wasn't like a pile of Luna sitting there that was ready to be. So then with the Frax, it's like 80%, or so. It fluctuates. But the thing that I like about Frax is that it plays with the edge, like scientifically, right? It's like we will test the market's willingness for us to be uncollateralized or under collateralized to whatever degree, and then we will edge towards that. And then if the market willingness for us to be under collateralized changes, we will increase the collateral level. And that seems like the right way to approach the problem, right? Like if you're going to take on this risk, like you might as well at least backstop it as much as you can and take it responsibly. So I'm glad that the failures happen to some extent. Like we all learn from it. If we blew up, then the next generation would learn from us. But this is what we call progress.
Yeah, and Flywheelpod was created as a direct response, in a sense, to what happened with Luna and UST, because we saw, algo stables like taken for a ride in a negative light, and before the Luna collapse, like it was crazy. It was like you saw it in like the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, like Luna hyped up so much, and then it had such a dramatic downfall. It was like the equivalent of a nuclear bomb going off, but on chain, and you just saw it in real time. Like everyone like looking at like the CoinGecko or on Twitter, like, oh, it's up, it's down, blah blah blah. And like when it like when it went down, and like when it like just collapsed completely, and we saw the conversation, it was just like, we have to like take the algo stablecoin mantle. I mean, Vitalik tried to like change it to automated stablecoins, but that hasn't really taken off yet. We'll see, but it seems like algo stable is so like sticky in people's minds. But who knows? Maybe the term algo stable can be reclaimed like the term DAO was. And I mean, you had a huge part in that with Moloch DAO. So do you see that possibly happening, like a redemption arc for algo staples, like there was for DAOs?
Yeah, for anyone who didn't get the reference, after the DAO blew up, the Ethereum community was consumed by what we called PTS DAO, which was where people are like, don't make a DAO. DAOs are bad. Like, why would you do that? Like, didn't you see what happened to the last guys who tried that? It blew up. It was bad for everybody. There's a whole Ethereum classic now because of this, and so we were like, no, like we think DAOs are the best thing ever. We want to make DAOs. We believe in coordination potential and unlocking it for humanity. So we're going to do this thing, and we're right. You'll believe us. 3-4 years later, there's like 10 million DAOs. So like, yeah, I mean, for me, I'm like, the negative activity around stablecoins just makes me like unreasonably bullish about stablecoins, because it means that like a bunch of other smart people who should be paying attention to this aren't, for whatever reason, right now. I think absolutely the mental, the stablecoins will come back. It'll be controlled stable, or like progressively under collateralized stable, or like some other name, some other euphemism for the category will work. And then because the value is there, right? Like people will realize it. Once you wash out, essentially, the UST had the intermittent value to a small group of people, but now that value has been consumed, the other stablecoins have more opportunity to grow and thrive. And so the next generation will more accurately reflect the real value created by the stablecoins that work, and that'll give all stablecoins a better name.
Yeah, and it's like
what?
stablecoins are the only thing that like, just want to say, like, they're the only thing that every single person understands, even not on the blockchain or anything. Like my mom understands, like, oh, cryptocurrency that's stable, or it's a dollar. Oh, okay. Well, then how does your project or your little fancy thing make money? Oh, so it gets lended, just like the bank, just like my mortgage, just like the collateral pays interest. Like every single person understands the value, the cash flow, how it actually makes money, and then also the actual financialization. As Ameen says, the tech is new and the innovations and the mechanism, but I think it's unequivocally clear that stablecoins are one of the largest product market fit categories of crypto in general. Like that's already been settled. I think it was on the Bankless podcast when they had me that I said, like, I see crypto as three $1 trillion categories, and one of them is Bitcoin, the other one's Ethereum, and the last one is stablecoins, and I still believe that.
So I just wanted to ask, this one's for Sam, and then we can jump to Ameen. What does the comeback story look like for stablecoins, regardless of algo or not? Like, what is that new narrative that we need? Is it Frax just ballooning into, a 50 billion pound gorilla, or is it Ride really picking up traction? Like what does that look like? Let's start with Sam.
What was your question? The comeback story of
Yes.
stablecoins? Is that what it is? Well, I actually think the stablecoins are kind of on a revenge tour in terms of market cap, right? If you look at the dominance of stablecoins, I get that, and I totally agree right now, kind of the stablecoin brand and things like that took like a pretty big beating because of the Terra stuff. But I always say a bear market is a bull market for stablecoins, which basically means is the price of assets goes down in dollars, right? What does that mean? That means dollars have become more powerful in terms of purchasing power. And it might seem kind of a little bit weird if you think about it, because we were just in a highly inflationary time, and it's still quite inflationary, but the actual constrictive monetary policy and rising rates has just hammered crypto, right? I mean, this isn't even up for debate. Look at the crypto prices, right? Bitcoin, around 20K, hanging kind of around there. ETH at like 1,500, down from 4,900, right? And so it's a stablecoin strong environment, believe it or not. And so I don't actually think in terms of revenge tours, they are having their revenge tour. It's basically right now. The main thing is which ones will out innovate others. That's kind of the main thing. And the way that I try to think about it, and I think if one attribute of the Frax community and project, if people remember us for, and is positive sum. And the way that I try to think about everything is how can we innovate so that it's positive sum for everyone. So things like our Frax BP stuff and Curve, like if you pair with Frax BP, we will give you extra incentives that are sustainable. It's proportional to your demand size in TVL, how much demand you create for Frax BPLP tokens. Things like FraxLend, which were able to actually lend against different types of assets, and also different types of vaults, allowing like leverage for different things like different projects and stuff like that. The view that I have is, if we're going to innovate, the innovation should increase the size of the pie for everyone, for all stablecoins, for all projects, rather than, oh, how do we out innovate and like take market cap from other projects. We've never thought of things ever like that. I think our actions have shown it. Sometimes we get burned for our actions, unfortunately. Like it seems like with the Faye thing, like we're one of the largest lenders of Fuse and Rari, because we thought it was really cool to kind of try this innovative kind of system, and it didn't work out, and now it's kind of a really unfortunate way to unwind if it ends up being unwound in that way. But our idea has always been, and our actions have always shown, everything we do is about how do we increase the size of the pie for everyone. Maybe us the most, but that's still bringing everyone up with us, rather than how do we, suck out, the market cap of this token and into ours, or something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Definitely feel the positive sum vibes. Yeah, I think the rates going up, it's like the U.S. Treasuries are kind of stealing the show, right? As a stable coin, though, it's like the rates on bonds and stuff are higher than like the lending rates on stable coins now. So like, I would expect to see some stable coin maybe outflow until either we get like Treasury-backed stable coins that pay yields, or until Frax gets an account with the Fed, and they let you guys have a direct swap line. And regarding like how do you get to like 1 trillion or something, it's like, I have a couple answers, right? One is like ETH goes up a lot, right? Like this is not the end of the story. Like global crypto adoption happens. Like El Salvador is not the last country to buy Bitcoin ever in human history. Layer 2s work, other countries adopt them, countries stake ETH goes to Valhalla, and the economic bandwidth of Ethereum suddenly grows to allow for more stablecoin, that TVL backed by ETH.
ETH maxis
right?
are salivating right now.
That's the ETH maxi version. Well, I talked to the Frax maxi version. Is like you get the direct swap line. It's like, which one of these is weirder? You make your choice.
Why not both? Why not
both? Right? Yeah. So I think things like that. And then generally I see the tech as getting somewhat commodified, and the way to explain that is that like here's just like a thing, I say it's like the cost of deploying a sophisticated smart contract system on Ethereum drops by like 10 times every year, give or take, and like what that looks like is that like MakerDAO took a team of elite specialists, like 10 people, like over a year and a half to do in like 5 years ago, right? And then like Rai was a fork of that, was made with like a small team of like 4 people that would worked for like 6 to 8 months, and then was able to deploy it. And like in a couple of years, it's going to be like push button, right? So a lot of the, I'm going to be able to like spin out my whole layer 2 ecosystem and drop every single DeFi project into it, and like, have an entire economy in a box. And then it's going to be, which economies did we just do glorified R&D for, right? Like, is this game economies? Are these like countries that we're bringing onto the blockchain? So USDC being the early exploration of like, and DAI as the separate sort of like pillars of stablecoin exploration. Like we could see a lot more fiats, a lot of other countries issuing their fiats on the chain, a lot of other issuers of blockchain fiat, besides USDC. All these, but like Sam said, all these things go up together. Like even the ETH going up version of the world like benefits the on-chain stablecoin version of the world.
No, I do want to double tap on that. Like, would you think the market cap of ETH is practically the ceiling for total market cap of stablecoins? given the, the security concerns and etc. Like, is there any linkage between the two?
I already know Sam's answer, but
I think there's some linkage, but not like one-to-one strong linkage. Like if it was like 1,000 times more stablecoins than like ETH market cap, that might be a little awkward. And it also has to do with like how much volume you're actually processing, because like you could have 1,000 times the TVL, but if it never moves, then like it doesn't actually matter. But if you have a lot of volume in the transactions, then it matters more. I would be concerned if there was like more than maybe 10 or 100 times the stablecoin TVL than ETH TVL.
Well, I think that so, I've actually talked to Dave about this at length, and I think that for decentralized stablecoins, their basically their limit, right, on that stablecoin trilemma is proportional, like Ameen said, is like loosely proportional to the size of the ETH economy, right? Like you can't have LUSD, for example, which is like a totally decentralized ETH over collateralized like thing. You can't have 20 billion LUSD supply if the ETH TVL is like 100 billion or something like that. That simply doesn't make any sense, because the demand for leverage of ETH, since that's the only way that LUSD is generated, is not a fifth of the entire economy, right? A fifth of the entire on-chain economy is not just people demanding leverage for their ETH, right? So that's never possible. There's like a very lower cap than that, right? And so, for example, if ETH economy was a trillion on chain, right? If the on chain economic activity and TVL and everything was a trillion, you could assume that, for example, LUSD could have a market cap of 30 billion perhaps, or something like that, right? Like 3% of the on chain economy could be leveraged for ETH through LUSD, a fairly Lindy effect, good product that's decentralized and a stablecoin, right? But you can't have it be like 20%, that there's just a huge cap there, right? Now, if you look at something like DAI or like Frax or even fiat coins, they don't have this cap, right? Because for good or for bad, they trade in this like exposure to some custodial assets. For DAI and Frax, it's fiat coins. For fiat coins, it's literally their cash, right, off chain, where they can literally just scale up no matter how much the actual size of the on-chain economy is. They can scale up to whatever the demand for cash is, not whatever the demand for the underlying generation mechanism of the cash, right? So it's a very different thing. And so the size of the on-chain economy does cap the size of fully decentralized stablecoins. That's my personal view, and I think that's always kind of been the case. That's why when, for example, we go through a bear market, even though the purchasing power of stablecoins increases, the market cap nominally of the decentralized stablecoins, they shrink, right? They shrink faster than the fiat coins or other things, because that's the downside, right? The downside is that you kind of shrink with the demand for leverage. However, the good side is there's no risk of the tornado cash situation or custodial blacklist or anything like that.
Yeah, I want to slightly adjust my answer. So one of the underrated risks of like a really high stable coin, like an external or just even like a concentrated stable coin supplier, is that they kind of have outsized power in forks, because then they can like help steer which way the blockchain forks. They could say, this fork, I don't know, has a great theft on it, or has some transaction that we want to censor. And so then, in some sense, giving a single stablecoin issuer too much concentrated power over the chain, it sort of breaks its censorship resistant properties. So having like 10 times as much stablecoin TVL as like the ETH market cap would, if it followed the same power law distribution as it currently does, with USDC being the highest, would probably mean that ETH is like America chain. So that wouldn't probably be great. I don't think it's like a security risk in the sense that like other people might get wrecked, but it like once you give that much power to one player, then it somewhat calls into question the rest of the security properties. So yeah.
Yeah, this is a good point because I always thought that in a certain sense, and I think I kind of was the first person to brand myself, if I had to have like a pejorative like moniker or something, a stablecoin maximalist. I don't like to say I'm anything but a positive sum maximalist, but if there's one thing or one asset class that I totally analyze and kind of am like ideologically interested in is stablecoin maximalism. And Ameen is totally right? And so one thing that I think is healthy actually for on-chain stablecoin issuers like Frax and DAI is that the outsized say by default goes to the token holders of the governance token. For example, I actually put up a proposal that said that Frax should only be redeemable on proof of stake ETH after the merge. This was because a lot of there's a lot of talk about this like proof of work fork, which I honestly think is just total nonsense. But to put this market signal out there, right? We thought that okay, FXS token holders should vote, and let's say for some reason, just hypothetically, let's say USDC is only redeemable on proof of work chain because I don't know, like some weird thing happens or something, right? And then there's a lot of ETH also has a lot of value. The proof of work ETH has a bunch of value. The DAO could vote, hey, we need like representatives to actually like redeem the actual proof of work USDC, right? And then buy back all the Frax 1-to-1, right? With like the redemption. Also sell the DAO delegates or something, sell all of the proof of work ETH probably on like some centralized exchange or something, right? Because the proof of stake chain can't interact with that. And then all of these proceeds, put them back on chain on the proof of stake system, so that all the Frax stablecoins that are canonically represented only on proof of stake. And so this is actually kind of interesting because Ameen is right. Stablecoins have an outsized say, but the decentralized ones at least are owned collectively by the community of token holders and Ethereum participants, right? So like MKR holders could vote the same thing. Technically, anyone that has stock in Coinbase or Circle or something could have some representation in the Circle process, but I don't think anyone does because you can't really invest in USDC or Tether, right? But you can actually be a stakeholder in MakerDAO or Frax Finance, right? And so I think that's really important to have a view that yes, stablecoins do have outsized say for better or for worse. However, that's why DAO-based ones are extremely important to balance out the kind of the centralized stockholder decided fork choice rules by like Tether or USDC, for example.
Yeah, that's a great point. We want to have decentralized stablecoins so that we mitigate the outsized impact of a single concentrated stablecoin issuer just being the king of the blockchain. Wouldn't be a great blockchain to be on if that was the case.
This actually sounds quite similar to nodes and node distribution of miners. Like you don't want to have like one node or one miner that is like most of the hash power because otherwise they dictate the chain basically. And this is kind of like it instead of like the consensus level, it's at like the application stablecoin level. Like you don't want one entity with too much power.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's like some end game roadmap for these guys too, right? Like in the future, we'll have like automated fork choice rules enforced by USDC that's like broadcast like from their node to other nodes or something. It'll be crazy. And
That'll be nuts.
People like rejecting forks in real time, Good times.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that got me thinking, like with, DAI having 82% of stable collateral, does it really even matter what the maker MKR token holders vote on? They kind of have to de facto go to where the USDC is, right? Because that's kind of where the collateral is.
No,
Unless,
that's actually not true, right? Because if you vote for the delegates of, like, for example, essentially real world delegates that represent the DAO, right, like Maker, then they have the right to create like an SPV or something to redeem all of the fiat coins on like the other chain, right, for cash, and then bring that over to the proof of stake chain, for example. Let's say if that's the situation, right? And so the fiat coins have to actually honor the redemption on the chain that they say they will, right? Because that's obviously the assumption. And if the chain is different, then they can just have the DAO delegates can just redeem on the different chain and then bring it over, bring the cash over, or use the cash to buy ETH depending on what they want to do, right? And then bring it over and back DAI on the canonical chain that they pick.
right, but then they would have to back DAI with the ETH asset. It won't no longer be USDC, right?
Yeah, so it would definitely you would still require some fiat coin to be on if you have Dai's design, and to be fair also Frax's design, as we do have a sizable fiat portion of the backing. You would still need some fiat coin to pick your four choice rule, so that you or I guess as Amin said, eventually Maker and Frax become so big that they have direct master accounts at the Fed. You need something, a link to the real world in the current design conception of Dai and Frax. Yes.
Yeah, Sam and I had this discussion on Twitter, and we sort of came to the same conclusion, which is like it would be awkward if there were no fiat coins available on the new chain, because you would have to like back it with like native collateral or cash everyone out or settle, something, right? So yeah,
That'd
we
be the
want to have
most like
decentralized
negative suck.
alternatives. Yeah. Yeah, forks can get ugly. I think it's important that we all stick together, but we also, in order to do that, we want to do that in such a way that we preserve our credible neutrality and our, censorship resistance. A lot of things that a lot of things start out as crimes and then end up not as crimes later, like slavery or being Jewish, you know. So it's important that we like think about that when we think about crimes and like protecting against people from doing them, because like we could succeed at making the like global panopticon surveillance financial system and then be appalled at our efforts that it like perfectly identifies and constrains the actions of criminals, including anyone who would think differently than our current government or something, right? That's not a great position to be in.
Yeah, it can really go either way. With like, because they're still like early. I mean, it's like terrifying to say that it could go either way, but like it depends like what like technology we implement. Like whether it's like how much we like implement ZKs, how much we implement like privacy at like a node level. Like these are things that are being thought about and talked about, and like I hope it gets resolved. Otherwise, like I don't want to live in a panoptic. That sounds awful. That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say I wanted to take a step back and ask Ameen here, if you were to be advising Frax like right now during this bear market, like what would you advise them to kind of work on or prioritize? And then obviously same question to Sam towards Ryan and Ameen afterwards.
Let me think. Yeah, so one idea, maybe they already do this, and maybe, this ignorance. Frax is doing a lot of things, so it's hard to stay on top of all of them. One idea is to help mitigate, USDC dependency by finding like market neutral strategies that are backed by ETH. So like hold ETH and then short ETH against ETH, like short squeeze or something against ETH would be an interesting like Frax AMO. because then you could like back Frax with dollar denominated things that are not necessarily like USDCs.
Cool, but wouldn't that then limit Frax's size? Because now it's, again, is pretty much how big ETH is, right?
I wasn't saying only do that. I just meant in addition to everything else they do, like offer that as an AMO. Um, you know,
Got it.
if
Makes
Frax
sense.
does that, maybe more people will build more things that allow things like that. And
That's what UXD does, right?
Yeah.
yeah, it's a similar idea to UXD.
Yeah,
Sam,
we're
how about
looking
you?
into doing yeah, we're looking into doing things exactly like that with Fraxlend actually. So one of the first ways that we have to do that is Fraxlend has to come out, which is mere days away. If you saw the kind of governance vote to actually deploy 5 mil of lending ceiling to the imminent Fraxlend deployment, but exactly as Ameen saying, this will actually, like, doing Fraxlend will allow us to, lend over collateralized against ETH, but then also do the reverse pair where you can borrow ETH, right, and sell it, right, as the protocol in terms of like an AMO operation to basically hedge, right, and create kind of this delta neutral position and grow it. And it obviously has to have partial it has to be partially like the size of the balance sheet, because like that obviously doesn't scale everything, but it actually can limit fiat coin dependence to a certain extent, because you can replace as much of demand for longs with a balanced demand for shorts that the protocol itself can do, and then you don't have as much fiat coin exposure. And I guess in terms of advising Rye or anything, I really like what Rye is doing, and I think it's kind of a sister protocol to what we're doing with FPI. And I remember talking with Stefan about the Rye's like peg, or kind of the controller that changes kind of the rates. And I said that, hey, it would be cool if there was different experimentation with different units of account. And I remember Stefan said that they wanted to do different, like Rye stablecoins, some pegged to CPI or some pegged to something else, rather than just the pi number or something, right? And one of the main things is, Rye already has such a good brand in terms of like this new generation stablecoin with a lot of cypherpunk backing and desire to make this bigger. It's not like the pi unit of account is like intrinsically a priori really useful. So perhaps there's potentially good things of trying a CPI unit, for example, and that'll unlock some really cool synergies just by slowly rebalancing Rye's unit to CPI. Then we could have curve pools against FPI and Rye, right? So like deep liquidity for people coming and going, or like Uniswap range liquidity. And so you start making that unit, the CPI basket, a legitimized unit, right? So one of the main things that makes a unit of account a Schelling point is you're able to use it for more efficient liquidity swaps. You're able to have people do accounting in it, right? And so the more deep liquidity there is against it, the more legitimate of a unit it is. And right now, the FPI is the only stablecoin pegged to the consumer price index, so we can't literally do any deep liquidity. There is not another token. It's literally just us. And so it would be really cool to either have just Rye itself slowly float to the CPI basket over a couple months, and then pair it with curve pools and all this really cool stuff, or just release like RPI, I don't know, like the Rye price index, to something like that, and just immediately have it be a PID controller to basket of goods, and experiment with that peg rather than pi itself. That would be awesome, because I think it would be a very positive something. It would increase yield for both, as people are able to LP into Curve and to Uniswap, and could do some crazy cool things.
RPI has a nice ring to it. That's actually where I went to college. Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. So funny reference. Yeah, I like your thinking. I think it might. We've talked about migrating Rye off of the dollar reference, and like maybe FPI is a good candidate, and like making other Rye-like systems, if we don't do that, that use the like FPI as the base reference asset for those, and then like, float around it using the PI controller, like seems cool. I think the coolest part is that we actually get to do stuff. Like if you were 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and you're trying to be an economist or you have opinions about anything, like you write a paper and you beg people to read it. And like what we get to do instead is just nerd out and write code and like put money in it and see what happens. And if it works, like maybe it'll be the future of finance. So.
And if it doesn't, rug. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the funniest part, Dave. Is like everyone like idolizes Satoshi, right, for just like getting up and leaving, right? But like, if that happened today, right, everyone would say, okay, he exit scammed, and then like quote
Yeah.
gave Bitcoin to the community.
Gave it to the community.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Sam, since we're talking about like decentralizing, I want to ask you, there was like an issue raised on Twitter kind of recently about Frax's multi-sig. You guys addressed it. I think you guys increased the numbers, but it like got, people thinking like, how does Frax plan not to decentralize governance, but like also like decentralize not only the multi-sig, but the multi-sig and the tech stack as well? Because we've had conversations about that too.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a few things that, like I said, there's like limiting factors to certain things in terms of trade-offs, right? For example, Frax obviously has a multi-sig. It's actually 3 of 5, not the whatever was said in like the tweets and stuff. Like you said, we fixed a lot of the legitimate critiques, but obviously to like update certain contracts, to mint Frax into selected AMO contracts and stuff. There's like an MSIG that changes parts of like the AMO ceilings and things like that pursuant to different kinds of limits of minting and burning Frax. But I think it's like important to realize there's like trade-offs here, right? And so like usually people don't talk about the trade-offs. Like for example, having an MSIG allows us to actually respond, and our team is literally around the clock. And one thing I'm really proud of is there's always some people from the Frax core team, even though we're across multiple continents and stuff, always active. For example, the Rari hack that we were talking about earlier, we actually managed to save a couple $1 million because we were able to have, there existed an MSIG for us to be able to actually pull out some of the lending AMO funds in an emergency before the hacker emptied it out. Now we lost 13 million, but it would have been close to, I believe, around 17 to 18 million that we would have lost if we weren't able to do something like that. In the Nomad bridge hack, which unfortunately we were, a little exposed to, since Frax does issue assets on Moonbeam, and so Nomad served a lot of Moonbeam things. We actually were able to get MSIG signers before the Nomad team itself was able to actually execute anything from their own MSIG. Like we were more responsive to that there, and so again, we managed to save a sizable amount of funds. Obviously, we were hit as well, but if like this didn't exist, we would be at a much larger loss, right? And people would be like, why didn't Frax do anything? Why didn't you guys like respond? So it's a trade-off between, obviously, as we were just talking about, responsiveness and being able to actually do things in an emergency versus, pure thematic, decentralization, with like a pure ethos. So it's difficult, right? It's obviously always a trade-off.
On the Rye side, we just moved everything to governance. So we have a Compound Bravo deployment that we have through Tally. So we just revoked all of the multi-sig access over the protocol. I feel a little bit more comfortable doing this because we're not exposed to like risky, trading strategies through AMOs like Frax's. If Rye was, then I think having a multi-sig would be the right move, and I think Frax is making the right move in having one for those strategies. The disadvantage of the governance now is that somebody could either tamper with the protocol or drain the protocol treasury through the governance, and so now we have to exercise constant diligence and vigilance to make sure that all the proposals are well formed and that they're we have enough voting power to respond. So we're setting up like notifications and stuff to track this, and some of the cases with these types of things are where you send some sort of proposal that has some thing like actions, like contract interactions that aren't super well formed. This happened to Compound, I think twice, once recently, once a while ago. And Rye isn't designed to be able to have some sort of fast response to that, right? And so if you don't have a multi-sig in those situations, you are kind of shit out of luck. And so you have to be extra careful when you are changing anything to make sure that it doesn't introduce any bugs or doesn't increase your risk like that. So I think having a set of multi-sigs that each controls certain things is ideal, in the sense if you have to, you have some sort of delegated guardians, and they only have control over some amount of things, and everything else would be controlled by the main governance, because it's not really scalable to have the main governance control each individual action for each individual protocol, unless you're making very, very few decisions.
So it sounds like you're more of the boat of, as Rye tend to scale larger and larger, you're a proponent of having kind of siloed off multi-sigs to control and just for nimbleness.
Yeah, I mean, ideally no multi-sigs, but that's only because Rye is trying to not do very much. Rye doesn't have protocol treasury operations, right? We just distribute tokens for dev or for incentives as needed, and the protocol updates are few and far in between. So we're trying to take it in a way where we just harden it and leave it alone, and our hope, our bet is that that will appeal to some group of people that want to use that kind of product.
Got it. But is it because Rye is kind of at the scale it is right now? But let's say Rye grew into billions of dollars and across multiple chains and L2s and have actual operations per se. Do you think at that point in time that you kind of need to have multi-sig or more control over the operations of the protocol?
I think if Rye grew that big, it would be because we don't have access to operations of the protocol. I think that there is some market for that, for decentralization, for untamperability, and that's the bet we're making with Rye. Now, other things, as soon as you have open market operations, the story gets more complicated. So, it might also be the case that Rye stays small because we don't do these kinds of open market operations, and so people have to find their own liquidity and things like that. These are the trades.
That's actually a very brilliant answer, because one of the things is it's you are really good at what you do, and there's a really unique use case that only, for example, your protocol or your stablecoin is able to address. So that's a very good answer, because, for example, let's say Rye did have an MSIG or something, right? Then unless it is also as extremely responsive around the clock, it is as permeant in terms of the team's responsiveness on all these other chains and all these things and etc., it would just basically be a worse version of Frax, right? It would have the MSIG trust assumption, but it would not actually be able to respond. Versus now, we can never have the exact utility that Rye is. There is an MSIG, right? And so, for example, Rye has a very unique value proposition, right? And like Ameen said, if Rye gets big, it is because of that, not in spite of that. So I find that pretty important distinction.
Agreed. I
Thanks,
was
Sam.
very, surprised by that answer. I mean, but here's my last serious question for the both of you. Let's start with Amin. What does success look like for Rye, in your opinion? Like, what do you want to see out of this project that you've built and created?
That's a great question. I posted a tweet about this. I said Rye has accomplished 25% of its mission or something. I made it up, picked a number, right? The first part of that is that like we have driven the conversation around like unpegged assets, like in general. Like if Rye didn't exist, then people would be like, I don't know, negative rates, right? So the fact that like Rye is in all these conversations today with DAI deciding to depeg and whatnot, like that's a big part of the mission for me in terms of driving its success, because Rye will only be successful in a world where more people understand that this is like a good thing, or at least not like a crazy trade-off, right? And then the other thing is that it is serving, the people who care about decentralization, right? Like we are proving that you can have stability backed by Ether, and that's pretty cool too. And that you don't necessarily only need the dollar peg to do stability. So I think success looks like growth. Obviously, I think ETH has to go up, the Rye number would go up, but it also looks like inspiring more Rye-like projects and other projects to take seriously, floating away from a fixed peg with the USD, and like success might also look like integrating with the FPI one day. So,
I'd love to see that.
yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Sam. How about you? What does success look like for Frax?
Yeah, well, I think the way that I kind of look at it is Frax is kind of building this Trinity stack, which I don't think we really got into on this one because it's kind of its own entire podcast. But it's basically a digital economy, and there's lending, leverage, and all powered by the two stablecoins of the protocol, right? Frax and FPI. FPI, like Amin said, is like this new generation of stablecoins that's kind of together with Rye leading the conversation of like assets that don't have a national currency peg, right? And I think that they'll be one of the most important asset classes in crypto in the next 6 to 18 months. So success for us would be continuing to build this all-encompassing decentralized DeFi stack that is powered by an ever-growing, larger, and more relevant two stablecoins, Frax and FPI. And so like in a year, for example, success would look like, Frax having tens of billions of supply, and FPI, hopefully growing 20-30x then, and then something like Frax Lend, Frax Swap, and our Trinity stack being a core pillar of the digital economy on Ethereum.
Yeah, this question's kind of funny because I'm thinking about like what I would have said if you'd asked me this same question about DAOs like 4 years ago when I was working on MakerDAO. Like what does success look like for you for MakerDAO, right? And I would be like, curing Ethereum's PTS DAOs, like there will be 1,000 DAOs. Like I would have sounded like an insane person because there were like 3 DAOs at the time, right? We had to like build our own by hand, right? And so, but like it worked, right? Like the crazy thing is that people responded, they got it, they coordinated, and like today I feel a similar passion for decentralized stablecoins, for like non-dollar peg, non-fiat denominated stable coins, things like FPI and Rye. Maybe there's like 10 of us who care, but that's fine because I feel like, in a couple of years, like everything will work like this, or there will be 1,000 of these, or like it'll just be way more obvious that this is a viable thing and like people should do it and use these. And it'll be as obvious as like starting a DAO is today,
Yeah, absolutely. And each of you guys are carving your own way and leading the path in your respective stablecoin experiments. I mean, with completely decentralized. I like to say decentralized moralist is your position, and you're carving the way forward with that. And there will be further experiments with that, whether it's like to FPI, the price target, whether it's like or price, yeah, to instead of the dollar to like this consumer price index, or maybe something else, maybe like a custom basket of variables. And Sam, you're carving the way for the fractionally algorithmic stablecoin path, and like you're gonna see other experiments, I'm sure, along that. And as they say, forking is the finest form of flattery. So it'll be exciting to see what happens in the future.
Thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Thanks for having us, by the way.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, we're gonna wrap up. We have like a few more like quick trivia questions. Kit, you want to get that going?
Yeah, sure. The first question is, what are the top 5 most decentralized projects in DeFi? Let's start with
I would say
Sam
Rye,
here. Yeah.
LUSD. Yeah, definitely Rye, LUSD. I guess Uniswap,
I would say
obviously.
Uniswap. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think, what is it? Two more I have to give. I think uh, Wire, right? I think that's pretty distributed in every sense. I would say Sushi as well. They've kind of fallen off, but technically it is distributed and decentralized. So that would be my top five.
Yeah. I'm trying to think like who.
Or wait, Curve. I totally forgot. Curve is pretty decentralized. Wait, I forget that.
Yeah. I think I have those. I'd probably give a similar list, honestly. I'm looking at the DeFi Pulse list, and it's like Maker, Aave, Curve, Convex, LUSD, Balancer, DYDX, Sushi. Um, so like, yeah, Uniswap would be the top, Liquidity up there, Rye up there, and then Curve, Sushi. Yeah, those are all close. Maybe Dogechain.
Yeah.
Nice.
Synthetic
Did you want to
seems
ask
a
the
little
second one?
decentralized. I don't know.
You got this one.
Okay. So the second question is, who is the DeFi mafia in your opinion? And this is alluding to like, the PayPal mafia of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and that group. Let's start with Amin on this one.
Um, I would think it's like probably the Unisocks holders. And like I think Maker Mafia was like the first DeFi mafia, then like maybe Compound Mafia, Uniswap Mafia. I suppose there's a whole DeFi Mafia diaspora on every other chain that had DeFi summers. Maybe there's some mafia wars that need to sort things out, or maybe that's just what we're watching on the cross-chain price charts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think obviously the OG stuff, like I think Maker and Uniswap. Obviously, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I think hopefully in the next 1 to 2 years, because Frax is doing so much stuff, we'll have a group of Frax Mafia alumni kind of building around the Frax economy. But it's still pretty young. But hopefully, we're gonna be creating that kind of atmosphere of high impact people. I think a lot of the blue chips, right? The blue chip protocols like Maker, Uniswap, Curve, they've produced a healthy amount of people that have been high impact, which is how I kind of define PayPal Mafia, right? Because they're like the original Silicon Valley, group of people that created PayPal, then went off and continued to create extremely high impact, important things in the space in their own era.
It was pretty fun to be an early LP to Uniswap. Uh, you know, I was running SpankChain and trying to figure out where to provide liquidity, and my options were like make a deal with an exchange and like hire a shady market maker and like, hope they don't screw me over, or like run the bot myself and like, pay some DevOps person to like secure it and make sure the algo doesn't do anything dumb, right? Like, then you read the Uniswap code and you're like, oh my God, it just works this program forever. I get tokens, I can put them in my multisig and secure them with the rest of my stuff. Like, also it's composable. This, you're just like, this is the future of everything. Like, this is how this is going to work. So, you know, we were extremely blessed to be early LPs in Uniswap and, you know, one of the largest recipients of the Uni airdrop. So I bought a house and decorated it with unicorns, as you can see. So shout out to the Uni Mafia.
Look at that chair, the pink chair.
I like to think that we've done obviously something not of that scale, but maybe smaller scale for early Frax and FXS LPs, because we had these like 3x locks that you could, you know, lock for a year or 2 years or something and get like double or triple APY. And so some of the earliest people, I know Dave, you found Frax extremely early, but they've made quite the run up. So that's where hopefully a lot of people were made.
Yeah, I don't want to toot like our own horn, but Everpedia Mafia in a sense. Like you with Frax, me with Flywheelpod, you know, and everyone else out there.
Yeah, it's cool having you guys build Ethereum stuff now.
Yeah. I agree. It feels good to be over here.
Positive sum.
Okay.
Positive
sum. Positive sum. And then let's end here with a couple of lightning round questions. Let's start with Sam on this one. When did you first touch the chain? What was your virgin crypto experience? And sexes don't count.
I would say probably sometime in late 2013 with like Bitcoin.
Yeah. There was the Silk Road mushrooms in 2012, and then more Mt. Goxing. I set up like a Bitcoin arbitrage bot. That was like the first Bitcoin thing I did. So.
Got it. Okay. And what do you like to do off chain? Meaning, what is your favorite touch grass activity?
For me, lifting for sure, powerlifting, getting a heavy lifting. It's when doing it nonstop for almost 10 years now.
And
Damn.
That's impressive. I can kick a bag and play some Beat Saber. Yeah, I'm a fan of the Beat Saber.
What is a Beat Saber? Is that like a beat, like kind of? Is the music?
It's like
the
Guitar
VR
Hero,
headset.
but you
I
LARP
didn't-
as a
yeah.
Jedi,
Yeah.
and then you
Oh,
play in
that
VR.
thing.
And so you
Oh,
actually
that
get a
thing. Yeah.
pretty serious cardio workout if you go in.
Oh, good. I got the Quest 2 like 2 weeks ago, and I've been playing every day. I downloaded the mod to get like the songs, and you can get, you know, K-pop songs are the very high BPM situation.
Right.
What is some advice you'd give to yourself 5 years ago? To your 5-year-old younger self?
Don't let bear markets and cycles in crypto discourage you. It almost feels like everyone goes through crypto puberty, which is like their first thing is they get into crypto on like an upcycle and they're like, wow, this is the next biggest thing in the entire world. And then the down cycle, it's like everyone has to like go through their puberty phase of like, nope, that was a scam. Like I lost all my money. Like this was all bullshit. And then they like miss the cool stuff happening in the bear market, right? Like the real tech and stuff, and then the next upswing they're like, shit, I should have just stuck with it. So I tell anyone, if this is your first cycle or something, stick with it. I saw my first cycle from 1300 BTC down to like I think like 190 or whatever that was, and then the ICO cycle, right? Everyone thought crypto was a scam after like like Denta coin or Doctor coin or whatever coin, right? Like
Pothole corn.
yeah, like pot coin and stuff, but stick with it. That's the advice I'd give anyone getting into it.
Yeah. I think run your crazy experiments is like good advice. I think I took that advice 5 years ago. But yeah, like some of the most rewarding stuff that I've done, both financially and otherwise, has been like stuff that I've done for passion and curiosity or even like spite. wasn't even like financially motivated, and so it's a little hard for me to give advice because of that outcome. So yeah, follow your passions, run the experiments you want to, and see what happens.
And final question for me. Let's start with Ameen here. If you work in crypto, what would you be doing professionally?
Man, I would probably be doing some sort of software engineering, maybe an AI, or I don't know. Nanotech stuff is cool. Biotech stuff is cool. I studied chemical engineering, got my degree in that. So, interested in like the physical sciences as well. So.
Yeah, I was a neuro and philosophy double major. I'd probably be doing something similar to Elon Musk's Neuralink. I always was really interested in brain-computer interfaces, the leading edge of that stuff. I worked in labs at UCLA that did like live place cell and neuronal cell hippocampal recordings in like live animals and rodents and things like that. So thinking about the future of that with like real people with brain-computer interfaces, that's probably what I would be doing. Something similar to Neuralink.
Well, that is like so out of there compared to stablecoins.
Yeah,
Cool.
stablecoins are like a religious thing for me. It's like, we've had this money, and it like nobody has ever really made it right. Like every time somebody's made fiat, it like ends up as a scam. It like starts out on a spectrum of useful, and then like ends up as scam, right, on a long enough timeline. So it's like, is there some way to like program rules to make people coordinate around this stuff at large scale, like make the rules transparent? This has been a stated goal of banks for a long time. So like stablecoins have a lot of just important cause to exist, and like could have a large impact. And so I'd probably be working on other things that gave me that same sense that they were somehow useful. And so like, yeah, like the news came out about like the little machines with nanotech that like you could actually like use DNA like to run a gear and then like have some leverage using it. It's like pretty funny. So I think those things are cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, money is religion. That's why the dollar's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. So, and that's why I call myself a missionary of Frax in my bio.
I love it.
So, like, I do view it in the same manner. It's like money encapsulates everything that we do, especially as
All
a
right,
frame of
I'll
reference.
be a prophet. Fuck it.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
Do it. Yeah.
All right.
We need you to carry the decentral mantle for the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, anyways, this has been fun, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, guys. This was a lot of fun, and excited to see where your experiments go in the future. And I'm sure we'll have you on again at some point to check on your progress.
Yeah, it was great chatting.
Thanks.
Cool.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
guys. Peace.
All right.
Ciao.
Take care.
Thanks for everyone for tuning in to that episode of Flywheel Pod. We had a lot of great discussion about stablecoins, about governance, about decentralization, about scalability, about pegging. Kiet, what did you think?
The whole time I was thinking, where can I get that pink chair that Ameen has?
Yeah. Yeah, you go get a time machine to 2019 and you LP into Uniswap. And that's how you get the chair. That's how you get it.
Exactly right. Exactly right. But all jokes aside, I love the part where they were advising each other. I think that was probably my favorite part, how Ameen was telling Frax to, decentralize more, and how Frax was saying Rai should find more utility out of their token. I thought that was a really good piece.
Yeah. Yeah, I concur with that. I also think in like a historical context and how this episode is viewed, relative to how, both projects move forward. I think it's like a really good, checkpoint in seeing like, okay, like these were like their stated goals. This is how they imagine like, what does success look like to you? And like, see like how close they like follow that path or deviate from that path. I think my favorite thing was comparing the arc of and lore of stablecoins to the arc and lore of DAOs. And Ameen was there for both. I mean, founder of Moloch DAO, when they had PTS DAO, and like how DAOs like came back stronger than ever. And then he said, like, I believe stablecoins can do that too. And I believe the same thing. I think stablecoins can as much of a disaster as like some experiments have been, I think like the reflexivity of it can come back like 10,000% of a vengeance.
Agreed, man. This is a great pod, and I hope the audience got away as much as we did.
Yeah, same. And I think they did. And I think they'll be coming back for more. I hope you do. And if you want to, don't forget to hit that bell notification so you keep on getting those steady stream of content from Flywheel Pod. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at Flywheel Pod. Join our Telegram group at Flywheel Pod. If you want to keep up with me, I'm on Twitter at DeFi Dave 22.
Keep up with me at 0x_K.
And we'll see you next time.
Peace.